Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our second City Building Ryerson Research and Focus webinar. This week's webinar focuses on It Takes a Community, Advancing Neighborhood Businesses with my colleague and friend, Dr. Zhixi Zhuang from the School of Urban and Regional Planning at Ryerson University. I'm Professor Pamela Robinson. I'm the Interim Academic Director of City Building Ryerson, and I'm also the Director of our School of Urban and Regional Planning. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you all know, Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, the Haudenosaunee, and it bounds them to share the territory and to protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So today we have a really exciting and impactful webinar with Dr. Zhixi Zhuang that's going to focus on the dynamics of downtown business revitalization across communities in the GTA. We're going to start with Dr. Zhuang presenting her research, and then we're going to have a moderated question and answer period. This formal part of the session should take about 30 minutes. If after this session you want to stick around and ask more detailed or specific or technical questions with Dr. Zhuang, we have what we call a deep dive or the after party to the research process, where it's a much more roundtable conversation. You're welcome to stay for that too. During the formal webinar and presentation, all of our mics and cameras will be off, but we welcome you to use the question and answer window at any time at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. If someone else has asked a question that you would particularly like to hear asked and answered, please use the upvote button and we'll try to make sure that we get to those questions first. Any questions that we don't reach during the formal session, we can also address in the informal session afterwards. This webinar, along with the others in our series, which run right through April, will be recorded and posted on City Building Ryerson's website. So without further ado, let's get on with the main show. Dr. Zhuang is an associate professor at our School of Urban and Regional Planning at Ryerson. She's also a registered professional planner and trained as an architect. Her research interests and area of expertise include placemaking, ethnic retailing, community design, multicultural planning, revitalization, and suburban retrofits, along with international urbanization processes. Today, we're really excited to learn more about Dr. Zhuang's research, in which she presents the findings of a recent wide-ranging study of local businesses and her actionable recommendations for developing vibrant, inclusive, and sustainable community spaces in commercial areas across Toronto and in our region as this district continues to grow and change. So without further ado, over to you, Professor Zhuang.
Thank you, Pamela, and thanks to CBR for the invitation. Hello and welcome everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Just give me one sec. Okay. Just turn this. Okay, can you see it now? I think so. My presentation today is about how it takes a community to advance neighborhood businesses. The purpose of the research is to better understand how neighborhood businesses work, what are their values, and how their best qualities can be advanced through collective community efforts, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, what lessons can be shared. My presentation will introduce 3 research projects. The first one is on the evolving commercial landscape in Toronto's inner city neighborhoods. The second project focuses on the emerging ethnic businesses in suburban Toronto, reflecting the diverse needs of our multicultural populations. Lastly, I will talk about 2 studio projects that I supervised last year, before and during COVID in downtown Brampton, where my students worked closely with the city of Brampton and the local BIA to address pressing issues related to business recovery, placemaking, and winter strategies. The first research was funded by Toronto Foundation, Waterfront Toronto, and Sidewalk Labs Toronto in 2019. The report, entitled The Evolving Commercial Landscapes in Toronto, is accessible online. It addresses lessons learned from the past and present and highlights future trends for neighborhood businesses in the inner city of Toronto. The research examined different build forms, including the typical Main Street commerce, like, for example, the 7 BIAs stretching from Queen West to Queen East, 2 market districts, including the Kensington Market BIA and the St. Lawrence Market BIA, and 2 apartment tower neighborhoods, Regent Park and Thorncliffe Park. Semi-structured interviews were conducted with 11 key informants, including developers, retail expert, city councilor, community advocates, entrepreneur, and BIA manager and city planners. The business data of the 9 BIAs from 2007 to 2017 was retrieved from Ryerson's Center for the Study of Commercial Activity. The overall pattern shows that retail businesses have declined not only in absolute number, but also as a share of total businesses, being largely replaced by restaurants. Businesses offering services have remained relatively static over the past decade, but only account for 20% or 30% or even less of the total businesses. The vacancy rate has increased in 5 of the 9 studied BIAs. So overall, Toronto's neighborhood businesses continue to face unprecedented challenges from the rise of malls and power centers, changes in mobility patterns, online shopping, and regulatory and tax burdens. The research reveals some of the innovative business development and community building strategies currently being tested across the inner city of Toronto. For example, in tower neighborhoods like Regent Park and Thorncliffe Park, economic development and community building go hand in hand. Initially, Regent Park did not have any retail. A critical path retail strategy was adopted to build a community commercial program, beginning with the everyday essential commercial services such as banks, coffee shops, and a grocery store. Following this critical path is a social enterprise model supporting local employment and small community-based businesses, including affordable rent, community kitchens, business mentorship and programming. The new residential apartment commercial zoning, or the so-called REC zone, now permits commercial uses in the base of apartment towers. The goal is to better serve local population with opportunities for shopping, services, education, and employment. The Women's Committee at Thorncliffe Park is another example of community leadership and stewardship that creates tremendous opportunities for local economic development and community building. The key lesson is that responding to community needs and engaging prospective small business owners is critical. This is Colleen Emery, the owner of The Lux, a small shared retail business incubator serving creative entrepreneurs. The model is similar to subleasing. Colleen is a landlord to over 150 makers by collecting rent. In return, she serves these makers by providing micro resources that allow them to grow their businesses. A key lesson is that business incubation in shared spaces is not just about collecting rent and providing the space. It requires careful curation, business support, and management. In the case of Market 707 by the Scatting Court Community Center, 17 shipping containers have been repurposed as small-scale restaurants, retail shops, and service providers. The market addresses service gaps within the neighborhood, including a bicycle repair shop and jet lock cleaning services. The lesson of Market 707 is that temporary use retail can be a useful business incubation tool, provided that it is thoughtfully managed and some level of stability is necessary. Light industrial uses are currently being integrated into Toronto's neighborhood commercial landscape. The mixed-use light industrial zone is an effective planning tool to promote local production, commercialization, creativity, and innovation. Popular forms include makerspaces, microbreweries, commissary kitchens, and ceramic workshops. But what is the neighborhood commercial landscape in Toronto's suburbs? I'm going to tell different stories in the next few slides. My research has been focusing on immigrant communities and neighborhoods in suburban Toronto. The GTA has a total of 7 million residents, accounting for 20% of the Canadian population. Nearly half of the population are immigrants, and some municipalities present prominent immigrant and visible minority populations, such as in the case of the city of Markham, 60% of the population are immigrants and 80% of visible minority. In total, 56% of the immigrants in the GTA have settled in the suburban peripheries. Funded by SHIRK, my research explored the Chinese and South Asian suburban neighborhoods across the GTA, especially in the areas where nearly 4,000 small businesses concentrate to support local economy and communities. I also conducted more in-depth research in 8 case study sites through interviews, focus groups, and with entrepreneurs, developers, planners, community leaders, and also intercept surveys with shoppers. One of the noticeable characteristics of suburban ethnic retailing is how the spatial concentration at whatever scale can operate as a resource to benefit the development of ethnic economies, and in return, make and mark ethnic places and build communities. As shown in the picture, many immigrant businesses readapted post-war strip malls in the inner suburbs and play an important role in sustaining community life. Many of them have been there for 2-3 decades, serving local communities. Beyond this shabby or unappealing physical appearance, there was an active social, economic, and community life behind those stores. You may consider these places as the suburban version of the Kensington market. Unlike many conventional suburbs, many immigrant neighborhoods in my research have relatively high degrees of institutional completeness, which means immigrant communities have developed various sizes and scales of ethnic institutions, satisfying the needs of co-ethnic community members. The way they function and organize spatially and physically are considerably different from conventional suburban neighborhoods. As a result, these immigrant communities have significantly transformed the conventional suburban spaces by adding new meanings, new identities, and new community functions and infrastructure. This is the case study in Brampton East. Within 1 kilometer stretch, the whole area is fully developed in the last 30 years with over 400 South Asian, African, Caribbean-owned businesses, different types of places of worship like Hindu temples, the Sikh Gurdwara, or the Islamic Service Center, and private schools catering to the needs of the South Asian community, a couple of community centers, banquet halls, and services actually account for half of the businesses, which is quite different from the neighborhood businesses in Toronto, where services only account for less than 30 or even 20% of the total businesses. Critical social infrastructure has been developed in suburban ethnic strips, plazas, and indoor shopping malls, creating the so-called third places to promote social interactions and community buildings. There are several implications for suburban municipalities. First, there's a need to prepare for the continuous demographic shifts caused by global migration. Suburban ethnic retail places contribute to building institutionally complete communities and providing the needed infrastructure. Therefore, these places should be targeted and supported for suburban retrofitting and revitalization. Municipalities should also do asset mapping of the existing cultural facilities and reinvest in the established social infrastructure. My research was also, I also made a 25-minute documentary to talk about my research, and it's accessible on YouTube. If you search Goburbia, Suburban Placemaking Amidst Diversity, you will have a glimpse of those suburban neighborhood stories in the documentary. The next few slides, I will switch the gear to talk about business recovery in downtown Bramleton. As I mentioned earlier, this was done through the collaboration and partnership with the city of Brampton, as well as the local downtown Brampton BIA. Two groups of students in our planning school were involved in 2 studio projects. At the beginning of the year of 2020, a group of students, we worked on a studio project that tried to reactivate downtown Brampton and to implement its Vision 2040 plan. Then COVID hit, and during the last phase of this project, we still came up with some of the learning from case studies across the world. And then the second studio project we are dealing with lots of COVID challenges and trying to figure out the solutions for business recovery. So we came up with this studio project focusing on winter strategy and focusing on Main Street recovery and placemaking in a post-COVID era. So from the first project we did before and during COVID, we emphasize on three guiding principles. One is connectivity, how to enhance the connectivity within downtown Brampton. So it's not just about supporting individual businesses, but also enhancing the public realm throughout the downtown space, and also creating community spaces and diversify the retail environment. For example, some of the interventions we propose, including wayfinding art and storytelling tools, and activate the laneways and use it as community spaces, and also animate vacant storefronts. And there's other intervention, including the adaptive reuse of the parking garage and using shipping containers, similar idea as the Market 707 to create those retail spaces, but also for community functions. Then during the winter time last year, that we came up with an action plan for the winter strategy, and focusing on 4 themes. One is about connectivity, continuing the enhancement of connectivity within the downtown space, and also supporting local economic activity. We came up with the idea of art and light installation, some of the lane closures to promote pedestrian activities, and creating the exploration route to engage visitors. Also to support local economic activity through branding strategy. Community engagement is a critical piece. We discuss about the outdoor fitness program, family winter fun activities and scavenger hunt, and also how to engage the youth population. And wayfinding is another theme. We are trying to incorporate some of the augmented reality ideas and creating, using digital technology to support wayfinding and also support business recovery. So all in all, these are some experiments, and it was done through a series of community consultation with local residents and business owners, and some of the other groups engaged in the downtown Brampton area. But we all know that the communities across the country or across the world are working proactively in searching solutions. So just based on my research that was done before, during COVID, and I'm offering a couple of reflections here for us to moving forward during the post-COVID recovery. The first one is to create a complete community. Local daily needs can be fulfilled within the neighborhood, but it's really crucial to follow the pattern of critical path retail, populating the neighborhood first with key daily services, and provide the needed social infrastructure and develop institutional completeness. The second one is about provide space for social enterprises that focus on both business goals and social goals, reducing overhead costs such as rent and utilities for social enterprises, frees up resources that can be put forward, having a larger social and community impact. And the next one is to create flexible space and programming that's well suited for shared spaces, pop-ups, and other innovative retail models, allowing for retail programming, including events, brand activations, and collaboration between talents. And then very important to ensure equitable access and affordability. Neighborhood commercial areas should be a place for everyone with a diversity of choices. An integrated model of planning, development, and retail management is required to ensure affordability goals are achieved, and also to encourage local leadership and community stewardship. effective community engagement is a key driver for of success. Given Toronto's diverse populations, the long-term sustainability of our neighborhoods relies on how these multiple perspectives are equitably represented in major decisions. Meaningful engagement with local community members will help create buy-in and cultivate local leadership. The current COVID pandemic has opened up the discussions around how we can possibly leverage local resources to support local community needs. The pandemic is a global phenomenon, but the solutions are largely based on the collective efforts of local communities. And I would really appreciate your comments and suggestions to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zhixi. And so I'm going to start just with a couple of questions, and then we'll move over to the Q&A. We have 2 questions in the box. So if you're one of our attendees, we'd really love to hear from you. You have a chance to talk to Dr. Zhuang directly about her research. So Zhixi, for the first one, I think one of the questions that's top of mind is, what are some lessons that we can learn from Brampton that could be used in other communities and other neighborhoods, particularly post-COVID?
The lessons I was first just based on my own research and also the studio work that has been conducted over the past year. I think the community, the collaboration among community members is the key. The city of Brampton and the local BIA, the community, other community stakeholders, they have been really actively engaged in this ongoing discussion and coming up with solutions and even supporting our students in doing the studio project, because it's really like we need this co-creation of the solution. So it's not the city to impose their policies or their ideas onto the local community or vice versa. It's not just like whatever people want to do or the landlord wants to do this or residents oppose the decision from the city, for example, but it really need to create a space for everybody to come to the table. And also what are the voices that traditionally have been ignored, and where are those people? And bring them to the discussion table to co-create the solutions. And also very important, I think the Brampton case study or studio project really reveals that this is not an isolated issue to look at Main Street or look at local businesses. They are the backbone of our communities. So it's really important to see as the very important public space. The recovery, the COVID recovery is going to happen in the public space, no matter what, on the street, in the park, with the local businesses, and so it's also the challenge, and it presents the challenges and opportunities for communities, for local communities, to reconsider how we can reinvest or recreate these public spaces, including local businesses. So it's not just about economic development. It's not just about recovery of the businesses, but also community building and placemaking in the long run. So I think that those are the 2 key lessons I think should be considered moving forward.
It's so interesting, everyone thinks about Ryerson as being only really engaged in downtown Toronto, but we have such a strong relationship that we're continuing to build with Brampton, and the City Hall staff at Brampton are amazing supporters, of students and student work and research, and there are so many collaborations. So maybe if we gave you 2 more lesson slots, another one might be, having a City Hall that's so creative and open and keen on partnerships might be another piece. And then the other thing I think that's really striking about Brampton is the pride of place. Like local communities in Brampton and the community business owners are so proud of their work, and people are fiercely loyal to their local businesses in Brampton. And so I think that spirit will carry us well through the recovery too. I've heard you speak about that quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit from the hyper-local to the federal. there's a lot of discussion right now as we look forward to spring and to the beginning steps of COVID recovery, which is desperately needed, and the role of the federal government and federal government stimulus money. There's the new Healthy Communities Initiative coming out of that funding source, but there may be other opportunities for stimulus work too. One of the hallmark pieces of your research is that it takes quite a nuanced and specific approach, and it kind of moves beyond broad brushstrokes to focus on particular actions. So can you, if the Prime Minister called and asked you for advice about how to spend the stimulus money wisely based on your research, what kinds of recommendations would you offer?
I would say it's really important to apply the equity lens onto the funding solutions. So if we have this pool of money, first thing to consider how to invest and target those marginalized communities, especially the areas with with a high percentage of newcomers, refugees, and racialized communities, because they have the hardest hit by COVID, and historically they have been already disadvantaged to access to resources and to business development communities. Despite many of them, they are risk takers and they are born as entrepreneurs, but they are missing those opportunities. So can we identify those communities and neighborhoods and actually from an equitable perspective and reallocate the resources and especially the funding stimulus to support those most affected neighborhoods and the communities. I know the Infrastructure Canada has already issued this call for funding proposals. There's like $31 million in the poll, ranging from a couple of $1,000s to $250,000 per project. So if the proposals are, if there are more proposals focusing on the most affected areas, I think that would be like most effective, most inclusive, and most equitable solutions. And also, as researchers and academics and research institutions and universities like us, and we are really welcome any kind of like community collaboration with partners from communities and from governments, NGOs, and we can actually co-create the evidence-based solutions and also engaging communities for input and etc. So we actually really welcome those opportunities to collaborate with community partners.
So the questions are rolling in the Q&A. We're going to take one in this formal session, then we'll continue to answer them. So the next one I'm going to ask you about is the mapping of cultural assets. And this question comes from Dina Grazer. She's wondering about what kinds of cultural facilities should be included in this asset mapping process, including should ad hoc ones be included? And how might they serve as a reference point? And what kinds of policy interventions could help nurture them along to move from being transitional to more permanent?
Oh, that's a really great question. I think there are many like informal ways of conducting ethic businesses, for example, right? Like when we talk about the asset mapping, not just the physical infrastructure, but also how they actually like use the spaces for their activities. For example, like how the senior people, as I show in the slide, the senior people, especially the Chinese Asian seniors, they use the shopping malls to do Tai Chi, fan dance, and they have this kind of like exercise club, and they do it throughout the week and every day, and it's a way to actually boost up their energy and help them stay healthy. So this kind of like informal uses of space are pretty much invisible to the city staff or the decision makers. So how can we actually document that and map it? So I think we need to be also creative, and we need to go to the communities and actually engage members from those communities to tell us their stories and tell us their lived experiences. Without that, it's really hard for us to just look at a Google map to say, well, this is like the existing cultural infrastructure or facilities, where we'll have no idea. It's remain invisible. So it's so important because there are many pieces, not only just about mapping this cultural asset, community assets, but also it's the preservation of the community heritage. And when we talk about historic preservation, this is part of our history. The immigrant communities, racialized communities, indigenous communities, this is part of the Canada's history. It needs to be, we need to find innovative ways to preserve it and reflect on that and carry forward. And so there are many other ways like storytelling and going into the communities to engage those members from the historically disadvantaged and underrepresented communities, and to get their voices heard. I think that's really important to move forward, and not just the traditional technical GIS mapping to do the asset mapping.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to call time. It's 11:31, so we're going to formally end the webinar right now. For everyone who has time to stay, and we're going to open up the mic to ask more questions, and we'll work our way through the Q&A. We'd like to thank you for joining us. This webinar will be posted on the City Building Ryerson website. We hope that you'll continue to join us for this research series. There are other Ryerson researchers engaged in similarly impactful and interesting research that really highlights the city building strengths of Ryerson as an institution. So thank you everyone formally for coming. We'll pause for about 10 seconds in the transition, and then we'll move over to keep working our way through the questions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, let's keep going. As you see in the Q&A, Robert Kelly asked a question early on in the webinar about the revitalization of downtown Brampton, and the concern was that would this be a revitalization that turns the core into a place that's only busy during the day and vacant at night? But you later on spoke about the need for complete communities. So maybe just briefly touch on that. Like, what's the best approach to keeping it a dynamic downtown and not a sleepy one?
Yeah. That's a great question, and in fact, because of the limited time, we didn't really have the time to discuss the details when it comes to revitalization of the main street, whether or not in Brampton or in Toronto. We are talking about shared spaces, and we're talking about the programming and the support and business management. So we are talking about like similarly like the 24/7 space, whether or not, especially when we talk about like when we see the increasing vacancy along those main streets or downtown spaces, and whether or not we can find innovative ways to activate those vacant storefront. Can we use it during the day as a NGO office for community functions and for community support and services? And in the afternoon, late afternoon, maybe it's after school programming, space for after school programming. At night, it could be something else for yoga classes. And can those spaces be shared more effectively and utilized for more needed community services, and turn those spaces into more meaningful community spaces? But also it requires the collaboration with landlords, for example, right? And potential talents. And also the city has a role to play. And thinking about having the temporary permit licensing or the bylaws, and can we turn these red tapes into green tapes, right? This is the approach that City of Brampton has been advocating for. So I think there are many ways. That's why it really takes the community to come up with those solutions and think about how we can actually reallocate the local community resources and find out that's like the locally made solutions.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting too to just think through what's the mindset you need inside City Hall. You know, where are the frameworks and guidelines needed around bylaw and enforcement, but where can we ease back and try to be a bit more creative, right? If you think back to, for example, the launch of food carts in Toronto, it was a really cumbersome process, right? And so we really need to find a way to be much more responsive and much more creative. Susan Brown's question picks up a little bit on what you just talked about, Zhixi, which is Looking ahead, what we're going to see is a much different flow of work in and out of our more concentrated parts of our communities. And so there's going to be a mix of hybrid work. What's the impact of that going to be, do you think, on local businesses in the downtown core? How are they going to need to change what they do?
Yeah, yes, for sure. There will be, we are not going to, most likely, we are not going to going back to the old normal. And we have to come up with new solutions or different solutions and different format. And the hybrid format most likely would be working for the next while. So in our study, for example, in downtown Brampton, we're thinking about the digital technology. How do we actually integrate technology and to provide some of the digital platforms to support businesses so they can do it like in the store or online, but also make sure it's like there's equitable access to the technology. Make sure people all have equal access to the information and the resources and the technology. But also on the other side, we still feel like people long for this engagement, social interactions, and community spirit. We want to see people despite the social distancing. I don't really like the term social distancing. I think it's more about physical distancing, but we want these social connections. We want to build this social connections. So a lot of those vacant stores, and we think about whether or not it could be used as a pop-up gallery, like to support local artists. They need the space to work. And many NGOs, like representatives from the NGOs, they talk about, well, if they can't go back to their workplace and they also have limited home space, and how can we actually find a space to serve the community? And so those vacant storefronts, for example, or if people stay working from home, and some of the business spaces, especially the ground floor spaces, they can be utilized or readapted to some of the other community functions, right? And so it could be like, it will be a hybrid format moving forward, but still there's a need for that kind of like social connections, interactions, and community bonding. So we are hoping that, like in the case of Brampton, the city has some of the city-owned public properties in the downtown area. So that might be something like the city can play a role in reactivating the space for community benefits.
Okay, next question comes from Brandon, who's still with us as a guest. So Brandon, if you want to join in and follow up with a question, we can turn on your mic. Brandon's question is, have there been any specific difficulties or benefits that you've encountered with the zoning regulation when it comes to providing equitable access to these types of uses and spaces?
Yes, for sure. Like, for example, the new rec zone, the zoning regulation, the residential apartment commercial zoning, that was introduced a few years ago by the City of Toronto. But before that, because there's this zoning barriers, and especially for the tower apartment neighborhoods, there's no retail there. And people have to travel far to get their to meet their daily needs for groceries, for banking, etc. And even like informal economic activities are all over the place, because people have to cut their hair, for example, right? Or they have to we need to find a home care for their kids. So they actually use their apartment units to do this like informal or illegal economic activities. And so now that the rec zone actually provides that kind of space at the ground floor, very important, because people need the access. People need to open up that space for more social and community benefits. So now that the rec zone actually enables the opportunities for local employment, for community activities, and like, for example, you can use that space to turn it into a community kitchen. That actually support local small businesses and entrepreneurship. So that definitely there are the barriers that really we need to tackle, for the municipalities need to tackle, and especially during COVID, we can see so many temporary short-term bylaws, right, in effect. and we can have the outdoor patio on the sidewalk, or the bike lanes got installed right away. It's really like, it's really, I think that is give us the opportunity, or maybe it's also a time for us to take a step back and revisit what didn't work in the past, and why can't we take this opportunity to fix it, or make it like like you said, equitable access, right? So make sure everybody has the access to the information, to the infrastructure, to the resources, and to the support they need during these extraordinary times.
Well, and it's so important too, right? Because if you think back to the Healthy Communities Initiative funding, if with the RAC zoning, for example, you're actually allowed to have the community kitchen in the space at the base of the tall tower, then you can apply for the funding for the capital investment. But if it's clandestine, or if you're doing it with kind of benign neglect, or a building inspector not paying attention, or just choosing not to enforce, you can't make that kind of investment. And so it's about this alignment of zoning, but also opportunity, right? And I totally agree with you that I think, like, for our profession, the great reckoning needed to happen on lots of levels beforehand. But, you think about how much work, for example, goes into committee of adjustment, and, discussions about how close to the side yard should a shed be, and how much time and energy and money goes into those processes. Could we use that planning potential in pursuit of resilient community building, right? And so I think I agree that there are a lot, this is a really important time to ask what matters, and how do we enable the success of our communities so our community members can thrive. Okay, next question comes from Anajan. How do we protect small business from affordability issues, including oversaturated market competition, online competition, rent, and increasing land value? That's a big list of very important and systemic barriers. What tools should the city be looking at implementing?
That's a great question, but also very complicated question to answer. So I was use the Regent Park example. They actually, it was like, it took them nearly a decade during this revitalization project to come up with the more effective ways to tackle all these issues. Developers have a role to play. Municipalities have the role to play, and community members they really need to advocate for their needs, and have their voices heard. So they came up with this community commercial program using this critical path retail model to first provide the critical retailing like banks and coffee shop and grocery store to meet the daily needs of the community members. But then later on, they open up the space they have the 5-year rent program. Like, for example, the first year, very low affordable rent to support business startup. So then later on, the second year, moving forward to the second stage of the program, the rent will be progressively increased at the end. But the initial startup funds, or the wave of the rent, could actually enable many startups to get the ball rolling. And also that the community kitchen program. It's not just about providing that space. And the TD Learning Center at the Regent Park, they have been working over the last decades to develop business support programs and like the food handling certificates. They need to train people, right? You don't just give them the space. Okay, you do whatever you cook, you do whatever you want there. But they need to actually hold hands together to train the entrepreneurs, and also provide them with the needed support, like how to write your business plan, how to get the loans from the banks, and how to sustain your businesses, how to hire your employees when you grow your businesses, right? So they actually come with this program, the programming to support the food handling certificate, the training of the business people, and the uses of the community kitchen, for example. Like, I remember at that time, we also did a studio project with the TD Learning Center at Ryerson, at the Regent Park a few years ago, they also like came up with the idea of supporting and entrepreneurs in the long run in a more sustainable way. So I think that is really, again, going back to the theme of my presentation, it takes a community. This affordability issues, how to combat market competition, especially to protect small businesses, because they are the backbone of our local community. They are the most vulnerable sector. We need to come up with that solutions to protect them. And also landlords play a role there. Can they actually provide the spaces that come with the needed utilities, for example, and flexibility of the space to support shared spaces moving forward, right? Like the idea we talk about, like use it as the NGO office in the morning and the afternoon can be shared with other community members. And during the weekend, what can we actually use the space and share that space? And there might be some like the more innovative practices to engage landlords to consider how to reconfigure the space and make it more flexible and more adaptive to future users.
Okay, great. Robert Kelly has a question about examples of engagement in Toronto. Robert, you're still with us, and we're going to come to your question about Young Eglinton in a minute. Maybe you can be a bit more specific. Maybe we can put you on your mic if you want, about what this refers to, because I'm not sure which engagement piece, because Zhixi talked about a lot of engagement opportunities. So we'll come back to that. A question from Yezhen. How do we reimagine the role and importance of the public realm and the pedestrian experience for storefront retails during the pandemic recovery? I know this question is very near and dear to you. So you've done lots of work around this on Young BIA. So
yeah, and I think the across Canada and also across the world, a lot of organizations and urbanists and community members, we are trying to find, like, we defined the future public space, and especially recovery is going to take place in the public realm. And so this pedestrian experience and the storefront, the ground floor spaces, and they are all important during the recovery. So how do we reimagine? And I'm not going to repeat a lot of toolkits offered by, for example, the CUI, the Urban Institute. They have already launched their wonderful Bring Back Main Street program across the country, and collecting ideas and designs, interventions and toolkits. And there are a lot of those recommendations. But I think the very important thing is the local version of intervention. So it goes back to the community. So I know there's another question about engagement. I think, first of all, it really needs to bring everybody to the table, especially those underrepresented groups. How do they actually vision the future use of this space, and how they are going to be affected? Because most of the cases, the underrepresented groups, they are affected the most. So what would be their suggestions and their visions? And in the generational perspective, for example, right, like kids, youth, and seniors, women, homeless people, like what are their needs and what are their perspectives when it comes to the intervention of these public spaces? And they are critical community players during the recovery. So I think engagement, again, going back to if we need to find some solutions, I will emphasize again on the importance of the needs of the local communities and the voices of the different members, especially the marginalized ones, and how do we actually engage them in this ongoing dialogue. And then from there, we can come up with this locally made solution for communities.
Okay, great. I'm going to go to Melanie Ramsey's question. Do you see the mix of retail stores along main streets changing after COVID? Are we going to see an increase in service business and a decline of retail? Other trends that you think are going to happen?
That's another good question. The retail mix, because right now, if we just look at the very prominent retail main street in Toronto, like in the case study we use is the Queen Street from the west to the east, and the trend actually shows the retailing is a kind of like declining. And services are not sufficient enough. We talk about building complete communities, but we can see the increasing restaurant and food related businesses in those neighborhoods. So maybe it really need to consider the way to diversify this business environment. A lot more, maybe there's a need for more services and retailing rather than restaurants. I'm not saying that the restaurant is not important. There's restaurant like food related spaces are important, but think about if it's food related, are we talking about grocery stores to meet the daily needs, because that really support local communities? And are we talking about some of the takeout spaces, takeout places, and food deliveries? And so then more spaces can be allocated for retailing and services. So that might be another way to think about post-COVID and how we can actually diversify this local business environments. But I don't think there is this kind of like a one-size-fits-all template. Because every neighborhood is so unique. It's comprised of different demographics and different local needs. And again, it really need to think about the main street in your own neighborhood, and how does that work with your local community, and figure out that balance. But I think in general, the data already shown that decline of retailing and the smaller portion of service businesses in those main streets. So there might be a need to diversify it moving forward, to ensure the completeness of different communities.
Okay, next question from Jeffrey Carter. Jeffrey's interested in the role of youth, and the pandemic is well documented to impact youth quite hard. He's wondering about how to engage youth in becoming stewards and telling their stories and helping to build new relationships inside communities to be part of the recovery process.
Oh, that's an excellent question, Jeffrey. And it's actually one of our main themes in the studio project in Brampton. And we actually, students also work with Urban Minds, youth engagement organization, NGO, to come up with engagement strategies with the youth population. So it's very important, because I think during COVID, youth has become and young children, they have become the very vulnerable populations because of the online school, the lack of public spaces for physical activities, for social engagement and interactions. And I still remember in Montreal, the Montreal North, that is the hardest hit neighborhood by COVID, especially with its Black communities. And a lot of those local kids, they have nowhere to go because they all live in those tower neighborhoods. So they actually went to the parking lots of the local strip malls, and they use it for the whole summer to play what kind of games they could actually do. So the lack of space, lack of public space, the access to quality green space for health and well-being. It's a lot of things, like it's really exacerbated during COVID. So engaging youth in this kind of like recovery, because they are going to be the future youth, the future generations and future generation of city builders and community members. So their voices are so important to be heard, and engaging them during the recovery will actually help us to be more creative and more inclusive. And so in the Brampton Studio project, we actually come up with ideas such as youth ambassadors, engaging local high school students from Brampton, and also the college students from Brampton to be the ambassadors to welcome visitors and support local community events, and also family fun activities and scavenger hunt by using the augmented reality app, and to engage kids and children. Once kids and children, young children, they love using their space, their family will come. Their parents, their grandparents, their uncles, aunties will come. And so that's really like how we think that will be part of the future solutions. And youth, they definitely play a very important role here in shaping and reshaping the future of public spaces.
You know, Jeffrey, I don't know if you're on TikTok or not, but if you're not, if you want to be inspired by the power of youth entrepreneurism, TikTok abounds with all kinds of teenagers who have a side hustle making and selling things. Same with Instagram. It's really interesting to see the rise of kind of small scale maker culture on technology platforms, and those kids all live in real neighborhoods too. Okay, last question from Lori Gervin. Can you clarify what you mean by services? You mentioned that in Brampton and other communities, services accounts for significantly more. What are some of the services that are the most thriving in suburban communities that might inform a downtown core strategy?
Oh, another great question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, services. It could be something like, if we talk about the suburban neighborhoods, it's like legal services, legal aids, travel agencies, personal services, the barber shop. You need to find the hair products, right? The optician store, not optician store, but the barber shop, the communities, the family services. Like they look for information to support their, for example, family members back home, or they need health services in the local community. So the services refers to personal and business services, and also accounting services for businesses and for family, even how to do income tax for newcomers, right? Those are the very needed culturally sensitive services for immigrant communities, which I identify in my research. But if we talk about like the suburban or urban communities, and services are important because people don't need to have to travel far to go to see their, for example, to find language programs, to find employment skills training programs, or for any culturally sensitive service providers. So there's like lots of needs from the communities of different, of diverse backgrounds. And if they need to look for health clinics, for example, they not necessarily need to go to a family doctor in the mainstream. They might need to find acupuncturist, right? Like go find some of the cultural medical practices to meet their needs. And so that kind of like services are important. And if we talk about downtown core, we don't see that many services in the inner city neighborhoods. This data shows even less than 20%. And normally we can find like say dentist office or massage therapist. But other than that, like if we need to look for, if people need to need services to support their skills training, language educational programs, or family counseling, etc., right? So where do they actually access to those services? So in the suburban examples, when immigrant communities develop the institutionally complete communities, they bring in services that actually people don't even need to go far. They can just walk to the suburban plazas. They can go for they can do the religious prayers in the mosque, or in the temple. They can just go for shopping, and then they can see their doctors, and especially some cultures, and they need to see female doctors for female patients, right? And so it's so important to find that doctor who can speak your language and understand your cultural practices and practice your medical treatments. And so all in all, it really, I think that kind of services are important piece for building complete communities.
Thank you. And perfect timing too. It's 12 o'clock. So we'll officially wrap this up. I'd like to thank everybody else. We have 28 people who stayed on with us to the very end. So thank you so much. A reminder that the webinar will be posted on the City Building Ryerson website in case you'd like to share it or go back and revisit it. And thank you so much for all of your really insightful questions and for joining us today. Thanks to the team at City Building Ryerson for making this webinar work. And thanks again to Professor Zhuang for sharing your research. We're really lucky to have you as part of the Ryerson community, but also it's so inspiring to see the impactful work that you and your colleagues are doing in communities across the GTHA. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
everyone.
day.
Take
Take care.
Really appreciate
Bye.
that.